Hey everyone, Ryan here at etrailer. Today on our 2020 GMC Sierra 3500, we're going to be showing you how to install the Airlift wireless onboard air compressor system. But before we get into that, let's check this thing out, see how it works, what it can do, and if it's going to be the right kit for you. This is what our kit looks like installed on our truck, and for having pretty large components, it's actually a pretty good fit. We got a decent amount of room to work on our frame rail to get all this stuff mounted up, and I think it turned out awesome. You know, it looks really good, at least in my opinion. But there's a couple of reasons or a couple things you could use something like this for. The primary one being to adjust your airbags, right, for your air springs, change of pressure and things like that. One of the benefits to having a tank instead of just a regular compressor is the fact that the compressor will fill up this tank and then you'll have this full tank full of reserve air, more or less, and that's going to make adjusting the bags extremely fast. So to give you an example of that, you know, we'll turn our remote on here, and this is how you're going to control everything. I'm a huge fan of these wireless remotes here. But our tank is full already, and our air bag's got 15 pounds of air in them. Let's ramp it up to like 35, and we'll see how fast this works here. Just that fast, I mean a split second, it went from 15 to 35. As opposed to if you just had a regular compressor, it would kick on and run for probably 20 seconds or something like that. So it makes your adjustments extremely quick and straightforward. Since we have the tank full of air too, that means we can have a fitting. We got ours at the back of our truck, and that will allow us to inflate other items too. They give you this hose that you can connect to it. So if you need to air up maybe an ATV tire or something along those lines, something small, you got the air pressure back here to allow you to do so. Now, you know, will this run a tool at the job site or, you know, be able to use an impact to take a lug nut off or something? Probably not, you know, just being realistic, but it's better than nothing. And this can kind of really help you out in a pinch if you need to air up something small on the side of the road or anything like that. One of the things I really like about this kit being wireless is that you can make your adjustments from outside the truck, all right? Especially with a kit like this, with the tank and such a heavy-duty compressor. You know, you could have your trailer hooked up to the truck and kind of eyeball it, right? If it looks like the truck's squatting or anything like that, you can make your adjustment that you need to, not have to bother with, you know, running your air hose over there and going through all that, and see if you need to make any other changes. So it's pretty convenient there. And not only that, so this comes with the remote, but you can also download an app on your mobile device, which will allow you to control the compressor as well. So you always have a backup in case you end up misplacing the remote control. We do get a lot of people asking if this compressor system is going to be compatible with different types of air springs. And the answer is yes. You know, the compressor kit doesn't care what air spring you got back here. You know, it's just got one job to do, and that's fill them up full of air, right? So whether you have an Airlift air spring like we do today on our truck, or a Firestone, or another brand for that matter, it'll all hook up and you'll be in good shape there. Now this is a dual path kit, meaning you can adjust each side individually. All right, so for whatever reason, if you had an off-center load or something like that, and say you needed 50 pounds there in this bag and 60 in this bag, you can do that. So ultimate control, really. There's another kit extremely similar to this one that is just a single path. So if that dual path doesn't interest you, you can always check that one out. But with the single path, you know, if you want 50 pounds, you're going to get that in both bags. And that's going to hold true at any pressure, you know. With that said, this compressor is super heavy duty, and it's good for 200 PSI, which is really high. I personally don't think I've seen an air spring rated for that amount of pressure, at least from my experience there. So keep that in mind when you're making your adjustments. You know, for example, we have the load lifter 5000s on today. They're good for 100 PSI. You never want to exceed that. So don't accidentally go past what your bag is rated for. When it comes to compressor kits, Airlift is one I recommend pretty much all the time, especially the wireless ones like we have here today. And I say because everything's well made, they think things through. With the wireless portion of it, I've yet to run into any connectivity issues or anything like that. They just flat out work, you know, and they try to make everything as user-friendly as possible when it comes to mounting stuff up, and their wiring harness is kind of pre-made for you and things like that. Even, you know, some of their components, their compressor has a big braided line there, so for longevity, that's definitely a bonus. You know, they give you a water separator here, which to push on that, and that'll drain the moisture out occasionally. One thing I'm not super crazy about is the brackets on their tank and just how you have to mount them. It's really difficult to do that, at least how we set ours up. And that's going to bring me to my next point. If you want to set up ours set up yours like we did here, I did use some carriage bolts and spacer blocks and flange nuts. They're 7/16 in size, about 1.25 inches long to attach it there. So you will have to grab that separately. I used a little bit of extra airline as well, probably 10 or 12 foot, just to run our fitting to the back of the truck where we can plug our air hose into it. Even their manifold, I'm a big fan of these, how they got them situated and everything. They come attached to these brackets and make it clamped to the frame, essentially. So it's extremely solid, and it's just less modification that you're gonna have to do to your truck to get everything set up. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is definitely one of the more premier type compressor kits. Like I said, extremely well made. Having the tank on here is really cool, just how responsive it is. You know, you make that adjustment, it happens in a split second, and you can call it a day. You know, having the wireless portion, especially on these late model trucks, is a no-brainer to me, because you're not gonna have analog gauges that you gotta screw onto your dashboard and run all this stuff all over the place and things like that. So, it turned out really good and works really good. As far as the installation goes, I'm not gonna lie, it's definitely time consuming. You know, there's just a lot of components here. What took me the longest is probably mounting up our tank and getting up into this area, because we'll have to do some drilling and things like that, and routing lines and everything. But thankfully, it's something you do one time, and you can enjoy the benefits of it, you know, from there. So take your time, should be in okay shape. If this is something you're not comfortable doing or don't feel like it, don't have the time, I completely understand that. You can always check into our dealer locator network, and hopefully that could kind of point you in the right direction as far as finding a shop that can set it up for you. But if this is something you're going to tackle yourself, feel free to hang around. We'll go ahead and get started on it now. To begin our installation, since this is a relatively big job, I like to really try to think things through, kind of make a plan of action. So first things first, I roughly laid out where we're going to be installing our main components. We have our manifold, our tank, and of course the compressor. And they're roughly going to go in this area. I'm going to mount them up on our passenger side frame. So now that we've determined that, we got the room and everything, I like to prep each individual component as much as possible. That way, you know, it's kind of ready to go once we have everything mounted up. So we'll start with our electronics here. We're going to have two smaller wires coming off of our pressure switch, and these are already pre-stripped and everything. And on these ends, you want to take the red butt connectors, slide them over the bare end of the wire, and crimp them down. And these are heat shrink butt connectors, so eventually when we make our complete connection, we'll come back and seal up the ends. And then as far as the solenoid there, you'll have two wires coming off of it. One of them, you want to crimp on a blue butt connector, And on the other one, I'm going to crimp on one of these ring terminals here because that'll eventually be a ground. Moving on to the compressor, that has two wires coming out of the back of it, a red and a black one. And these have some pre-attached terminals on them there, and we're not going to be using those. So I'm just going to cut them off. And the way you can strip a wire back, you just remove the insulation. You want to give the wire a good twist. And with these two ends, we're going to crimp on the yellow butt connectors here. The tube or hose coming off of the compressor, we'll remove that little plug there. And then this inlet port, that's going to be where air filter gets hooked to. We'll pull that out. We'll have this fitting here. That'll thread in. You don't need to use thread tape or anything. Get it hand tight and snug it up with a 5/8 wrench. And you might as well prep our air filter too. So that's what this is. There's another fitting. You'll just thread this on by hand. As far as the tank goes, there's going to be several bungs that fittings will go into. And since we're mounting ours like this, really you're going to want to make sure that the drain is on the bottom or the lowest point. That way when you drain it, you know, all the moisture will come out through there. So that'll be this hole for us. Some of the fittings will have sealer on them already. If yours do not, you know, you can use sealer tape or pipe dope, whatever you got. But the way these work, just want to make sure you get them started straight. We'll tighten them down with a 9/16. I'm usually somewhat cautious with these since they're brass. Some of them are. You know, they're pretty easy to crack. So I usually like to get it pretty tight and then just bump it a little bit more. My thought is it's easier to come back if you have a leak and snug it up a little bit more than break the fitting and then try to go through all that trouble. So just something that I've experienced. So I got that one set up, and I'll go ahead and get the rest of our fittings installed and show you how it turned out. Got all of our fittings in. So of course on the bottom we have the drain. Right here we have the blow-off valve so you can release air pressure if needed. On this side of the tank, I'm going to hold off on doing anything with that in hopes that the compressor line will be long enough, it looks like it will, to be able to thread directly into it. If not, they give you some extra fittings that you can use to extend it there. On the back side of the tank, I put an elbow, and that's where our compressed air can come out of for the onboard air, you know, if we need to use an air chuck or something like that. And then on this side, this is going to go to our manifold. So there's a fitting, a union, more or less. You thread that in, and then you thread on this separator here, and then an elbow onto it. And on top of the separator, there's going to be an arrow. You're going to want that arrow to face towards the manifold. Since we're all prepped, we can start to actually mount everything up. Now, it's hard to say where I'm going to put this exactly because I don't really know if it's all going to be in the perfect spot until it's done, right? So I'm going to mount all this stuff up and show you where I ended up putting it. And the way that you can mount this, the manifold here, it's really convenient. They give you a bracket that this will wrap around the frame and go through there. So that's how you can bolt that up. With the tank, you know, you have your mounting brackets. They give you a bunch of hardware. You can secure this directly to the frame, or if you want to make a bracket, it's up to you. And pretty much the same deal with our compressor. You know, it has these openings there where we can get hardware through. So I'll go ahead and get started on that and see how it turned out. I got these components mounted, and I'm not gonna lie, this is kind of a pain. You just don't have a ton of room to work. But starting with the compressor, what I did, I just held it up, used it as a template, and just pre-drilled some holes in the frame a little bit smaller than the self-tapping screws that they give you. Held this up there and used self-tappers to secure it, and it's not going anywhere. It's really secure there. The tank, I kind of had to get creative here. I'm not really crazy about how they, you know, the brackets here that allow you to attach it. Just don't have a whole lot of room. What I did, I actually used different hardware than what they give you, just because it wouldn't really work in this case on how we have this mounted up here. So what I did, use a template, pre-drilled the holes, and then the fasteners that I used these carriage bolts here. They're 7/16 and 1.25 inches long, a spacer block, and a flange nut. All right, and then I had some 7/16 fish wires too. So what I did, where the holes were drilled, I took the coiled end of the fish wire, pushed it through the hole, and brought it out through this opening. And then you would attach your hardware to the fish wire, right? And then I pulled it back into position so the bolts came out like that through the frame. And then I was able to secure it with the flange nut there. The manifold here, though, on the other hand, they make this about as straightforward as possible. I just used our clamp, put this up against the frame, put the clamp through the bracket, tighten the clamp down, and that's really all there is to getting this set up. As far as our air intake assembly, pretty straightforward. You just take the included hose. One end just pushes over that barbed fitting that we installed on the back of the compressor, and I like to take a zip tie and zip tie it to it for a little extra security there. But then the other end of the hose pushes onto the barbed fitting on the air filter, zip tie again, and the way you can attach this, this has a piece here that can get pressed into a hole and lock it in that way. And so what I've done, up here in this area, I've drilled a hole that we can get this installed. So I'll push that in place and show you where I put it. Here's where I put the filter, and this is actually in this little cavity here where our bed bolt is bolted up through. And I chose this spot because it's contained, it's up a little bit higher, and it's more likely to stay dry. So keep that in mind when you're setting your air intake filter up. The last thing to do with the compressor, with the exception of the electrical cords coming out of it, is the hose, which needs to get connected to the tank. And the fitting's already on there and everything. I just threaded it into the last remaining open fitting on our air tank. On the other side of our air tank, we have this separator here. We still have an empty fitting that we need to get done. And this is going to get connected to the manifold. So you want to take your air line, the big bundle that they give you. You want to cut it clean. And this is how we're going to make all of our connections, you know, whether it be right here or when we tie into the airbags. This is how it's going to be done. So you want to use a tool like this, or a tubing cutter, or I've taken a block of wood and a razor blade before, cut it that way. Because you want a good, clean, straight cut. You don't want to use a regular pair of snips because it'll probably leak, you know, it'll get kinked. So we'll cut it, you know, straight, clean, no burrs or anything on it. And then it just gets plugged right into the quick connect. You'll feel it kind of lock into place there. So I'll route this up to our manifold, plug it in the same way, and show you how it turned out here. So what I've done is I routed the air hose up towards the front of the truck where it plugs in right there. So really nothing to it. When you're routing airlines, you know, do your best to avoid hot or moving parts. It's going to hold true with wiring and stuff too. And just try not to put any kinks or anything like that in it. I got our air lines hooked up that are going to go to our air springs. And what I did, they give you a big bundle of this airline tubing. And where we have the stuff mounted, I did end up using some additional tubing as well. But the main one that they give you, I cut that in half. And then on one of the lines, I just put some white paint just so I could keep track of what line is which. And so that one, the one with the white paint, that'll go to the right side airbag, or the passenger side. Then the one that's left blank will go to the left side or driver's side. So I routed those up and along our frame here. And then once I got to this point, if you remember, there was still a fitting back here that we put in, a little 90-degree elbow. And that fitting, there's going to be an air line that gets plugged into it that runs to the air chuck for, you know, if we need to fill up a tire or whatever. So that's where that additional tubing came into play. I probably used 10 or 12 foot of it. But I plugged that into there. And then so that tube that coming out of the tank and the two tubes coming from our manifold continue to get routed on top of the frame. And around in this area, I went on the inside of our frame underneath of our truck. Here's where our tubing comes over the frame, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's a factory harness that runs on top of the frame rail, and that's what I zip tied all of our tubing to. So it just continues along and up and over this big cross member here. The tubing, what I done is ran it through a opening in our frame rail, and I did that because the exhaust system is right here and everything. I just want to avoid the heat, and so I did take some wire loom, put it over the tubing just as an extra layer of protection when it's going through the frame rail. But it just runs inside of our frame where it comes out here, this large opening. And that tubing is going to continue to run up and over. And right here is where I tied one of our airlines into the existing airline from our airbags. So this is the existing airline that goes up to our license plate where we had the original manual inflation valve. This side is going to the air spring. And this is the line coming from our compressor system. And so with these T-connectors, they work just like any other quick connect. You're going to cut your line in half, reconnect it using the T-connector, and then that third and final T, that's where you're going to plug in the compressor line. The other two are going to continue to get routed along through here. And right here is where I have the airline from the compressor teed into the driver's side airbag. Same way we did the passenger side one there. And that third and final line drops down to here where I have our fitting mounted up. I have this fitting on this little bracket, and I made this bracket just a piece of angle, and I used the factory bumper fastener to secure it to the bottom of our truck there, and not really a whole lot to it. You know, you put it through there, tighten it down. You can mount these up in a variety of different ways. The instructions give you some options, or you can get creative and put this pretty much anywhere you want it. Moving back to our frame rail now, our manifold here, we can start to get the electrical side of things completed. So you'll have the big harness that they give you. This connector plug is going to plug right into our manifold. Just clip that into place there. These are usually pretty tight fits, which is a good thing. So just make sure it's completely plugged in. And once that is done, there's going to be several wires kind of coming off of the harness, and ours were all labeled. All right, so we have these thin wires here, one's black, one's red, labeled solenoid valve. We're going to connect that to the wires coming out of our solenoid valve that we prepped earlier. So don't matter which one goes where, as long as you got them both hooked up. Used our butt connectors to complete that connection. On top of our manifold, we had the 2 wires that we prepped earlier. One of them, you're going to connect to the thin gray wire coming off of our harness labeled pressure switch. So I got that done. And as far as the other one goes, that was a ground, and we crimped on a ring terminal to it. Turns out just the amount of space that we had to work, wasn't able to get it grounded there, so I extended that wire maybe by like a foot and ran it more towards the front of the truck where we could get a good solid ground. Here's where I ended up grounding that wire. You know, you just want to ground it to a good clean piece of metal there. You use a self-tapping screw, and honestly, if you set your truck up like we're doing ours today, we had a lot of additional power and ground wire that runs up into the engine compartment, so you could always steal a foot or something off of that if you don't have any laying around the house. Coming off of the harness, you're going to have a thick black and thick red wire that's labeled compressor, power, and ground. And that's pretty straightforward. That needs to get connected to the wires coming out of our compressor. So black to black, red to red. Use the butt connectors there, and with these heat shrinks, the way you'd seal the ends up, you just need a heat source and apply light heat to it, and they'll shrink down. The remaining portion of our harness is going to get routed up into the engine compartment, so I just have it connected to this factory wiring on our frame rail running towards the front. And there's going to be a relay that's built into the harness as well. And I just used a self-tapping screw to secure it to the side of the frame there. So the rest of the wire continues along here. And if you kind of just jam it up through this opening, kind of going, you know, upward, you can kind of get the rest of that wiring up there and then go from up top, reach down and grab it and pull it into the engine compartment. The engine compartment, our wiring comes up. The pink one will run inside the truck eventually. The black one, that'll go to the ground or negative battery post. So I cut it to length, crimped on a ring terminal. The red one is going to go to battery power. So I ran that over here and then used a butt connector to connect it to the included fuse holder. Make sure the fuse is not installed just yet. We'll do that at the very end. Other side of the fuse holder gets a ring terminal. And I'm going to hook this up to this post here. So I kind of like to just hold the wire down while I'm removing this. That way we don't lose any connection or anything. This nut is on here with the 13 mil. Get that broke loose. This feels like it might be one of the nuts that isn't really designed to come completely off. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to snug this back down real quick. What I'm going to do is just cut a small opening in our ring terminal. About like that, probably work. I'll loosen the nut back up and then just slide this underneath of the nut, connect it that way. So I'll tighten it back down, and then I'm going to do the same thing for our negative post there. The pink wire, like I said, will run inside of the cab of the truck, and on the firewall, it's kind of tricky to see here, so bear with us, but on the firewall there will be a factory grommet, and it'll be sealed. You can cut a little opening in it and take that pink wire, push it through the grommet, and it'll come out by the floorboard on the passenger front seat. Here's a look at that pink wire coming through the grommet from the inside of our vehicle. The pink wire, that's going to have to get connected to an ignition source, meaning when the key is on, it's going to have power. When the truck's off, it won't. And I took the other included fuse holder, connected it to the pink wire. Then on the other end, I put on one of the blue spade terminals. And after doing some testing here, which I believe every truck is set up like this, at least from my experience. You look in the fuse block, we got this big 50 amp fuse here, and then there's a single bare post right next to it. When the truck's off, there's no power. When it's an accessory or on, we have power. So we're going to utilize that because it's a dedicated circuit. We're not going to have to tap into any other fuses or anything. This red wire here, you can ignore that. That's for snow plow controls and stuff. But we'll go ahead, take the spade terminal, put that over that post, and then we'll take the 3 amp fuse and place it into the holder. Now that we have everything hooked up, you can take the 30 amp fuse, place that into the holder up here, and then what you want to do is put the battery in your remote. You want to do this fairly quickly. It'll connect, and sometimes, sometimes it'll automatically pair, other times it'll pair with the compressor. You'll see it, you just hit enter, and it'll pair up. But that said, we'll get our key in the accessory position. That way we can test everything, make sure it's working. Once you turn your key on, your compressor will turn on and run for a couple of minutes, roughly. And what it's doing is filling up the tank and filling up the whole entire system. Let it do its thing and wait until it turns off. And then from there, that's when you can make adjustments to your air bags. So for example, right now there's 25 pounds of air in them. And just because we make an adjustment doesn't mean that the compressor will turn on necessarily, because we have all that reserve air in the tank already. So we'll go up to like 40. In that case, the compressor did kick on for just a minute, and the bags are at 40. The compressor is continuing to run to replenish that air that we lost from our tank. So pretty straightforward, and it's actually pretty impressive how fast it can fill the bags up, especially under a load. The truck's under its own weight. Once you let the system build full of air, you want to check for any leaks, and you can spray down all the fittings with soapy water. I did find one, which it's leaking right here. It's pretty obvious, you can tell if you see the bubbles forming like that rapidly, you got a leak. I tried to just tighten this up a little bit, still leaking. I think what happened was it probably went a little light just by looking at it on the plumber's tape there. It's not a huge deal. I'll drain the system, pull this fitting out, clean it up, put more tape on it, and that'll more than likely fix it. But if you happen to have a leak where one of your air lines goes into the quick connects, you can drain the system, remove the line, recut it clean, plug it back in, and test it until everything is sealed up. What I ended up doing, put more tape on there, got it put back together, and everything is sealed up. So we are good to go. But with that done, that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Airlift onboard wireless air compressor system on our 2020 GMC Sierra 3500.